chills.
Number 8. Bad news. When the Britius family moved to Schuylkill, Pennsylvania, they couldn't have been more excited. This was the house of their dreams, the place where they would be ready to spend the rest of their lives. Still, the eager homeowners had played it safe and taken their time before moving in. They took all the right steps, including having it officially inspected first before buying. Once it had been deemed safe to live in, the family moved in straight away and started to get sick soon after. After they all came down with flu-like symptoms that would not go away no matter what they tried, the family was told by contractors that they had a mold problem. When the contractors took a closer look inside of the walls to see exactly what they were dealing with, they found one of the strangest discoveries of their entire careers. Inside of the walls, delicately wrapped inside of old newspapers, were the carcasses of dozens of dead animals. Chickens and other unidentifiable animals were being pulled out from the wall right in front of the Britius family. It wasn't just in one wall either. Dead animal carcasses were being removed from the walls in almost every room, and even the ceiling. The yellowish newspapers were all dated from the early 1930s and 40s, meaning that the decaying bodies had been around for more than 60 years. Still, even though they had found the source of the mold, they had absolutely no explanation as to why someone would stick dead animals all around the house. Only after they contacted a local historian would the family be able to find any answers. Apparently, whomever had lived in the home long ago had been a practitioner for what's known as powwowing or Dutch magic. As the historian explained to the family, back in the last century, it was not uncommon for the owners of a house to slaughter animals and wrap them up in newspaper. Keeping them inside of the walls was actually supposed to cure them of health problems. Instead, it was creating them for the Britius family. As fascinating as this history lesson was, it still did the family absolutely no good as far as their situation was concerned, since their insurance policy only covers recent incidents. And since the animals were placed in the walls during the 1900s, the family was forced to pay for their removal out of their own pocket. So far, the family has spent $20,000 hiring people to rip up the walls and take out the dead animals for them. Worse still, the family continues to suffer from health problems, but they have run out of money. They now have to live inside the house knowing that dead carcasses continue to silently rot behind the walls. Before we go any further, do you think there's something creepy hidden in your walls? Let me know in the comments with a simple yes or no. My answer would be no, but I'm not going to start ripping apart my walls to find out. It's a proven fact that generosity makes you a happier person. So if you're generous enough to like this video, then thank you because it really helps me out. Number 7. Not on a plane. Jan Perillo is 73 years old and should be living out her golden years free from worry. Instead, she sits wide awake in a chair that's in the middle of her apartment in Castleberry, Florida, waiting for the next scaly intruder to come poking through the wall. It all started one day after Jan noticed two strange holes in the walls of her apartment. Even though the holes were on opposite sides of the room, they were both down low right by the carpet. Jan lived by herself and wasn't sure what she should do about the situation, if anything. Finally, she gets the courage to lift up the carpet, and that's when she sees them. Droves of snakes coming out of her wall and dropping underneath the carpet below. All Jan could think to do was use her grabbing device to pick up the snakes and take them outside. Soon, hordes of snakes started to come out of her walls on a regular basis, day and night. It got so bad that she became afraid to touch anything and couldn't even sit down on her sofa, because she once found some snakes there before too. She spent days beating the snakes with a cane and putting them into her bags to show her apartment manager. More than a dozen snakes have been removed so far, some 2 feet long. She now stays in a hotel which, thankfully, has absolutely nothing strange inside of the walls. Number 6. Snakes on a flame. A homeowner in Queensland, Australia was alarmed to see smoke coming out from an electrical outlet in his wall one day. When he removed the plastic electric socket cover and looked inside, he was further surprised and terrified to find a large carpet python snake frying against live wires. He could smell it being cooked alive. Thinking fast, he turned off the electricity and saved the snake, along with his home. When a famous Australian snake catcher named Richie Gilbert arrived at the scene, He was able to pull the bottom half of the snake out of the wall for a closer look. Still, he didn't want to pull too hard and hurt the snake, so he cut the hole wider and managed to bring the rest of the injured reptile out. As the videotape shows, the python had a large burn mark on its body, but its tongue continues to dart in and out of its mouth as Richie speaks a little about its species to the camera. The snake is eventually taken to a local zoo where veterinarians treat it for severe burns. It's unknown if the snake made it through the ordeal or if it perished. Either way, as Richie points out, the house could have easily burned down had the owner not have been home to take immediate action. Number 5, only in New Jersey. A contractor working in New Jersey was ripping down a wall when he came across the shock of a lifetime. Neatly embedded between the sheetrock was an actual grenade, only the top was sticking out and he could see that the pin was still inside. Basically, the contractor was face to face with a potentially live explosive device. He backed out of the room and called the police, who in turn called the Essex Country Bomb Squad. In the meantime, police officers evacuated 7 people from the home and checked the surrounding houses to make sure no one was there. In the end, the bomb squad was able to remove the grenade without any harm. They were relieved to find that the bottom had been drilled out long ago and it was not active. However, it was impossible to determine any of this from the weird angle that the grenade was originally sticking out at. Since stranger things than a grenade in the wall happen in New Jersey all the time, the police decided to call it a day and not try to figure out who the explosive device had once belonged to. Number 4, evidence in the wall. When Donald Graham had one of the wealthiest women in England fall for him, he couldn't believe his luck. Janet Brown had a ton of money and completely trusted him with all of it. So Donald did what any other cold-blooded con artist would do. He plotted her death and planned for a big payout. Janet and Donald were planning to go to France in 2005 when Donald canceled their flight at the last second. His wife had cancer, he told them. When Janet decided she was gonna go without him, he killed her and disposed of the body. Just days before, he had somehow convinced her to transfer £300,000 from her bank account to his. With her murder complete, Donald next had postcards sent from France to Janet's parents. He wanted to make it seem like she had abandoned him and decided to never return. Next, he got in close with Janet's parents and started milking them for money. Overall, it seemed like he had gotten away with everything, until one day someone finally noticed. When Janet's parents died, they still trusted their daughter's murderer completely. Only after an accountant saw that the deceased family was somehow still depositing huge sums of money into Donald's bank account did anything happen. Police initially launched a fraud investigation, which soon turned into a murder case as they uncovered more. The evidence against Donald was overwhelming and his story quickly fell apart. He was convicted and sentenced to a life sentence without parole. Authorities had caught the man, but they were still annoyed that they were not able to determine how he had killed her. Then, one day, a builder was renovating their old property when he found something of interest. After knocking down a wall, he was surprised to find an old airsoft rifle. Police believe that this was the murder weapon used to dispatch of Janet Brown. Her body was never found. Number 3, 28 years later. One day, as a cleaning crew was working on an abandoned New York home, they found a false wall in the basement. Behind the wall, they found a large plastic bin, and inside of that, they found a plastic bag. Inside of that, they found a skeleton wrapped in an old sheet. It was easy to see that whoever this person was, they had died a tragic and painful death. Their skeletal hands were tied with rope, and a large portion of their skull had been beaten in. Their remains had been walled off for 28 years, and authorities say that the plastic bin is what kept her corpse from stinking up the entire house. Using dental records, authorities were able to identify the body as Joanne Nichols, an elderly woman who had lived in the house with her husband until she went missing in 1985. There were absolutely no clues as to her disappearance at the time, but now it was apparent that she had been murdered. Her husband, James Nichols, had died in the house much later, which is what prompted the cleaning crew to enter the home to begin with. James was apparently a very creepy person to be around. For example, one time a neighborhood child had asked him to help her with a squirrel that she had found injured. Instead of helping, he immediately killed it with a hatchet, without even bothering to take off his nice suit jacket first. She and the other children screamed in her front yard. Another time, she had caught him taking pictures of her while she was wearing short shorts. Neighbors described James as living a normal life after his wife's death. One neighbor says that he went to all of the church dinners and often went out to the local IHOP as if nothing were wrong. Looking back now, they realized that James was more than just strange. He was most likely a murderer. Number 2, Raven in the Wall. In 2008, a 37-year-old woman named Raven Joy Campbell moved into an apartment at the Harbor Hill Housing Project in Los Angeles County. She was living with her high school friend and her friend's boyfriend too. Things were going well until sometime within half a year of moving there, a fourth person joined them. His name was Randolph Garbutt. He was 43 and he was a psychopath. Raven went to the mall one day and then went missing shortly thereafter. Years later, in 2015, authorities received a tip that Raven could be buried within the walls of her old residence. For quite some time, the tenants had been complaining of a horrible smell that they think could have been a body. Police searched the apartment and K9 units find her remains buried in the wall. She had been violently beaten with a hammer. Details of the case are scarce, since it is still pending, but Randolph Garbutt has since been charged with her murder. Number 1, Herman Monster. Herman Webster Mudgett moved to Chicago in 1886. There, he adopted a new name, Dr. Henry H. Holmes, and took over a local pharmacy. Exactly how he acquired the business is still unknown. One day, its former owner just seemed to disappear. Anyway, Herman Mudgett didn't continue to use the property as a pharmacy. Instead, he added more and more renovations to the estate until it was a full 3 stories taller. Then he opened it up as a hotel. There was a yearly convention taking place in the city, and he knew that people from all over would need a place to stay. He thought that he could make good money off of them. Behind the walls of the hotel, however, was a much darker secret that no one in Chicago knew about. Although Herman Mudgett appeared to be a kindly and well-educated man on the outside, deep within he was actually twisted and deranged. When police eventually investigated his hotel, they were appalled to discover what he had actually been up to. When a person checked into the hotel and caught Herman Mudgett's eye, he would give them a very special room with a very special purpose. The room was built especially for him to kill someone in. When he was sure that his guest was alone and vulnerable, he would slip into their room and either kill them with chloroform, strangle them, or sometimes just beat them to death. Certain rooms were even equipped with special equipment that he could pump poisonous gas through. Most of his victims, if not all of them, were women. Once he had satisfied his urge to kill, he would open a trapdoor that had been built directly into the wall of the windowless room. The dead body would then fall down a complex series of special chutes, which lead directly into the basement, where he could dissolve them in vats of acid without anyone being the wiser. There were 60 rooms in his hotel, and there were also many dead-end stairways that lead to nowhere as well. This confusing floor plan was to keep people away from the hotel's true design, which was to serve as a murderer's playground. In fact, it would one day be dubbed as the Murder Castle. When the place was first being built, however, Herman Mudgett would use multiple contractors and fire them before they could catch on to the real purpose no one could have ever possibly known. By the time the murderer was caught, Herman admitted to killing as many as 200 victims. Police weren't sure if he was exaggerating, but then again, they really didn't doubt him either. So many people were flooding Chicago for the convention that they felt it really was possible for him to have killed that high of a number, at least in theory. Since most of them were dissolved, it was hard to say for sure. Back then, by the time the victim's family realized that something was wrong, they hadn't heard from their loved ones in so long that they absolutely had no idea where to even begin with. Likewise, no one staying in the hotel could have realized that, if even for a brief moment, there was a dead body falling past them behind the walls. Before you go, I wanted to tell you about the giveaway I'm hosting. But first off, thanks for watching, and leave a like so I know you made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe because I upload new videos every week. My name is Chills, and I'm thanking you all for your support by giving away 3 $100 Amazon.com gift cards. It's completely free to enter, and you can enter the giveaway by visiting the link at the very bottom of the description. It doesn't matter when you're watching this video, because top15s.net/giveaway will automatically direct you to my most recent giveaway. See the terms and conditions on the linked page for full details. If you want to follow me on social media, my Twitter is at YT_chills, and my Instagram is at DylanIsChillinYT with underscores instead of spaces. Feel free to send me a DM if you have any questions or suggestions. See ya.